Uh, uh, Given the fact that there are a lot of unknowns out there, in your worst case scenario, do you see a case where the fisheries, particularly the shellfish, shrimp industries, just don't come back?
No. The Gulf is an amazing, resilient habitat. Most people aren't aware that there are lots of natural seeps. There are about 1,500 natural seeps occurring in the Gulf, but this is chronic exposure. There's the equivalent of an oil spill, tanker spill every year in the Gulf. There's about 48 to 50 million gallons of oil that's leaked naturally. Why so much? Because there's a lot of oil out there. And it seeps all over. You can see it from satellites. We can track the plumes, and over time we can go back and pinpoint the exact locations of those seeps. We've gone down in submarines or with ROVs and actually ground truth that where we thought the seep was is right there on the seafloor, within a few meters where we thought it was. So all of this oil that's out there naturally, we still have what appears to be a fairly pristine environment in the face of these catastrophic blowouts or spills. There's still a huge diversity of life. What we have is the capacity by the animals that are there, particularly the microbes, to break down this oil. And so we probably have a much richer biotic component to the microbial component to our Gulf of Mexico than most other areas of the world where they don't have these natural seeps. So the Gulf will recover. There may be devastating effects to the next year's shrimp recruitment, the population next year or the year after, and it has to do not just with survival of those in the open ocean, but their nursery habitats back in the wetlands. Most of these shrimp have a large portion of their life cycle back in the estuaries, and if these estuaries are lost, it'll have big effects on recovery rates and that sort of thing. But the Gulf will recover. It's just whether or not we're going to be satisfied with the rate of recovery, and whether or not those fishermen around the Gulf are, what they're going to do during that time period.
There's a hand right here, so did you have it, sir? Yes. And then there's someone behind you. Yes, sir, you.
Waiting for Mike.
Oh, no.
Okay, actually, you started to answer my question. I was going to say that there, in addition to the natural ecosystems, there is a human ecosystem there. People who live, fishermen, shrimpers, and so forth. You talked about the possibility of recovery, but for Professor Twilley, if you start, with the kind of measures you're talking about, controlled flooding, rebuilding, or restricting certain activities, or modifying activities, how is that going to interplay? Are people going to be able to sustain their existing lifestyles? Will they have to change? What's going to happen to this human ecosystem?
Well, I think that change is evident no matter what we are faced with in the future as this oil spill plays out and sea level rise and the landscapes and the wetlands and the shoreline continues to deteriorate. You have to remember two things. One is that the natural system is very dynamic. And historically, the people who lived in this delta were also very dynamic. They adapted. I mean, the strength and the will of the culture and the people who live in this delta, unless you go there and talk to people and experience, it's something I never experienced in my life. And so, to tell this group of individuals that they can't recover and won't have resiliency is just not the way it's going to play out. And what the kinds of things I'm talking about are actually fears that that these people had in this region as they in their own lifetime. They don't have to talk to their grandfather or their grandmother, great-grandparents. If you were born 50 years ago, water gets in your backyard in Chalmette, Louisiana, with a strong southeast wind that never occurred when you were a kid. So danger and fear of how this landscape is collapsing means that if we do nothing, everybody loses. If we do something, you're right, there are going to be inconvenience. But the option of doing nothing just doesn't exist. And we knew that somewhat prior to Katrina. We calibrated those risks after Katrina, and we talked about protection and what we can do. I guarantee you there's going to be a huge discussion as this oil spill plays out as to a way that we now calibrated the true risk of energy exploration in this region. And the fact that we didn't think that an offshore catastrophe at 5,000 feet would come onshore and cause the devastation that we've already seen, and we don't know in this room what we'll see in the next 3 months, it's just inconceivable, inexcusable that we don't look at risk in this complete ecosystem from offshore to onshore. So to answer your question, you bet there will be inconvenience and there will be some changes, but this is a very resilient, adaptive culture. They know that they feared certain risks prior to this oil spill, and I think that you'll find a lot of interest and very aggressive actions following.
Yes, sir. Second.
Internet from Radio Canada TV. I just want to come back to Hickstock oil spill. How the ocean recovered, the marine life, the wildlife. It was different spill. It's a huge one, but it was more in shallow water, if I can see. But do we still see consequences now? And is it a good example to compare with what we have now, or it's very different?
Well, I have to apologize. I did not work on the Ishtok spill. I'd have many colleagues that did, though. The Gulf has recovered amazingly well from this huge amount of oil. There are many species that are in the process of still recovering. The Kemper Italy turtles, which their geographic distribution is largely restricted to the Gulf, have been recovering. They were greatly affected by that spill. There are other species like that that are still rebounding from something that was decades ago. But by and large, the Gulf has recovered well, just like I expect that it will recover well from this spill. It's just that there will be lots of perturbations and lots of people and species affected by it. There are still large tar balls, tar mats, all those sorts of things which can be found directly resulting from that spill. But to a large extent, all of those that came up along the Texas coast, you don't see it anymore, and it's pretty amazing that they were just incorporated into the system.
That's it. Don't mess with Texas, right?